Welcome to the Classical Gabfest, a weekly discussion about the ever-changing world of classical music. I'm your host for this week, William White, and with me as always are Tiffany Liu and Kensho Watanabe. This week we'll be discussing responses in the classical music world to the Russian invasion and crisis in Ukraine. Then we'll discuss whether it makes sense to have age limits in musical competitions. And finally, we'll look at the seamy underbelly of the world of film music. But first, we like to start with our prelude segment. And our unofficial official intern, Joseph, is here, so you all know what that means.
This week we'll be playing a round of everyone's favorite game, Name That Tune, aka Stump the Hosts.
And now Free Zone presents Name That Tune.
Music games don't come any simpler and any more intimidating than Name That Tune. And this game is especially fraught for our hosts, since none of them know what they're about to hear. That's because these Name That Tune submissions come from you, our loyal listeners. Your hosts make no guarantee that they'll be able to identify precisely what these pieces are, but we hope that hearing their thought processes will elucidate something about how they listen to music, and provide some entertaining musical banter. So that none of them can see the submissions, I'm once again here to officiate, unofficially. Any banter before we get in? How are you all feeling today?
Oh, we're ready for our monthly, I don't know, what shall we call this?
Schooling?
Schooling will be something where we actually learn something from this, but I'm not sure if we do. So let's just get it over with.
Yeah, let's get the schooling out of the way at the very beginning with listener Jeremy's submission.
Oh.
Here it is.
Okay, so I mean, this is giving very strong Defia vibes, but is it going to be that clear cut is the question.
Even not as specific as Defia, I would say it has very strong Spanish flavor.
Yeah, I was, Tarina is maybe a little closer.
I mean, we've got a full orchestra here. We've got prominent tambourine. We've got these wind melodies with all of these little dips and turns and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. This could certainly be, I wrote down Defia. Tarina is an interesting guess. Gabriel Piernet. I mean, let's not forget that the French were doing lots of Spanish flavored stuff. I mean, so
Chabrier.
Chabrier is a great guess. Yeah. Uh-huh. What year would you guys put on this?
1890s.
1890 is exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, Chabrier is not bad. I mean, the only problem with Chabrier is that he wrote very little.
That's right.
He wrote that piece called España, and that's not what this is. Yeah, so Piernet was one that I was thinking of. I mean, this could just be like some random overture to a zarzuela.
I was going to say, there's, even though, Chabrier has an entire opera, L'Étoile, and, could this be some random instrumental section from that? Sure,
It could be. I mean, I don't think that L'Étoile is quite as Spanishy as some of his other stuff. I like Tarina, Defia, and I think that we should pick a French composer just to go in that direction. Piernet or Chabrier, who do you like?
I think we should do both and eliminate one of Defia or Tarina. I mean, it's not going to be that straightforward with Jeremy here, right?
Oh, interesting. All right, let's do
Chabrier,
Piernet, and maybe let's cross off Defia because that's too obvious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Watch it be Defia. That would be awesome.
Yeah, this might be like the one where he trolls us and actually picks oh, gosh. Yeah. Just the psychological warfare of this game.
So, Joey, Piernet, Tarina, Chabrier. That's our bucket here.
Well, you got just about as close as you could get without actually getting it. This is the orchestral piece En la Alhambra by Tomás Bretón. The date on it is 1887.
Who?
Tomás Bretón.
Spanish composer?
Spanish composer, born in 1850, died in 1923.
Very good.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Well, Jeremy.
I take that as a...
We're close.
I think we did pretty well. Joseph is right. We did as well as we could.
Okay, great.
Today's second submission comes from listener Sarah. Here it is.
All right, so we have violin and we have a cello, and we have
a violin? I wasn't sure about that. I thought it was a solo cello.
all of it was maybe the beginning. I thought I heard a violin.
Oh,
And
interesting.
now maybe I'm hallucinating. I don't know.
I think it was solo cello.
Okay, let's just say it was solo cello.
Playing a very avant-garde, high modernist solo work, using all sorts of extended techniques and
I'm not sure I agree with.
Really extended
Yeah,
technique, right?
it is just using kind of interjections of various.
It's like harmonic, like gestural writing where there's like pizzicato, but with like a glissando at the end of it. But there wasn't like, they're not drumming body of the instrument or
Yeah, they're not
singing
playing on the
or-
wrong side of the bridge.
Okay, so maybe this is not quite as high modernist as I made it out to be at the beginning.
I mean, it's certainly modernist writing, but I think it's fairly, like, I go towards some of these, gestural is a good word, kind of interjections, different parts of, like, something that in a different world would be a melody, right? Like, it does seem somehow melodic to me.
Yes, I agree with you. Well, okay, the first name that came to mind was George Crumb. The second name that came to mind was Sofia Gubaidulina.
Yeah, I thought of that too.
This could be so many people. And it could be so many people I've never heard of. And it could be so many people I have heard of. I don't know. I mean, there's not that much to go on here. Is there anybody else in that sort of Crumb orbit? I don't know. He was a little bit of a law unto himself.
I mean, I'll throw in Dutieu.
Dutieu. Interesting. Okay. All right. Let's go with those three. Joey, Crumb, Gubaidulina, Dutieu.
Not quite. This is the Korean-German composer Lee Sang-gyun. It is for solo cello. This piece is called Glissé,
And when was it written?
1970.
Okay.
All right. Well, there was no chance there. Okay.
No.
Let's keep going.
Another recommendation for you all from the listeners.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, listener Sarah.
Today's last submission comes from listener Adriano,
Ah.
maker of Musical.
Yes.
Here it is.
That took a turn at the middle of that excerpt.
Yeah. Solo piano in a harmonic style that, I don't know, for like the first little bit there, I was thinking was pretty 19th century. But then towards the end, I thought this could be a little more like contemporary pop kind of a thing.
Yeah, it had a little bit of neo-romanticism about it.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, the first thing that I wrote down was Gottschalk.
Oh
there's
yeah,
a-
me too.
Yeah.
That was on my list.
Nice, Kensho. Yeah, there you go. I knew that. I
good
figured
one.
that you would have thought the same thing. There was a little bit of that South American kind of rhythmic flair to it, a little bit of flamenco. But by the end, I don't know, just with that descending bass line, kind of power chords, I wasn't so convinced of that anymore. But I would maybe still keep him in the list. I mean, the ending made me think of somebody more like Fazil Say. Maybe I'll put him on the list. Anybody else want to get in here with ideas?
Nope.
I'll get in with the monthly hint,
The monthly hint.
which is that this composer is best known for a very 19th century opera. This is deeply in the 19th century.
This is 19th century?
This composer is best known for a 19th century opera.
Bizet.
Yeah, Bizet would certainly
Qualify.
Yeah.
Maybe this is some random Russian. They like with Rimsky. He did that Capriccio Espagnol kind of stuff. But I don't think that Joseph would reference a Russian composer of opera because we know so few Russian composers of opera. Unless it's like Glinka or somebody. I don't know, Tiffany. I think we just have to go with Bizet. Like I can't think of anybody else to put in there.
Listeners, does it ever get too boring stumping us? I mean, it's so not hard.
Joseph, is it Bizet?
It's not Bizet.
Wow. This very narrow hint was not narrow enough for us.
No.
All right.
2 more guesses for the pot.
Single opera.
Humperdinck?
Like one hit.
No, but no.
I know, it seems extraordinarily unlikely. Ludwig van Beethoven. Is it Glinka?
It's not Glinka.
Oh boy. Who are we missing from that period who wrote one opera or is known for one opera?
Oh, Chabrier, we haven't said.
Okay. I mean, I'm not sure that I know him mostly for his one opera, but that would track with us all knowing him because we've just mentioned him.
Literally
Right.
just said it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's just go with it. Joseph, is it
go with it.
Chabrier?
It's not Chabrier. I hope I didn't mislead you with my hints. This is a piece by Smetana. Interestingly, this piece was written in 1849. Also, interestingly, what you heard was 4 different players at 2 pianos. This is his sonata for 2 pianos, 8 hands.
Oh, how interesting.
Funny.
I actually want to listen to this piece.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious now.
So that's 0 for 3.
Surprise,
once again.
surprise.
Yay!
That just about does it for this week's Prelude segment. But before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our listeners that we do periodic listener-generated Name That Tune rounds. So we invite you to try and stump us. Check our show notes, where you'll find a link to the form where you can upload a 30-second clip of an unidentified piece of classical music for us to try to identify.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Joey.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Joey.
And with that, we move on to our first topic. Tiffany, what do you have for us?
Well, listeners, in this podcast, we discuss topics on our ever-changing world of classical music, and boy, has the world been changing this last week. So let's get into it. This is essentially going to be a news segment, but of course focused on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and related news in the cultural sphere, primarily relating to artists and their public statements about the issue. But before we kind of look into all of this coverage, I kind of want to ask you guys, like, you must have this sense of, like, what am I trying to say? Like an existential question of, like, does any of this stuff we say publicly about this matter? Like, we're just reading statements from people at this point, right? That's the most and yet the least we can do as artists. And, like, it's times like this where you kind of question, say, like, what does me saying this thing matter? And what does my doing what I do matter?
Well, I think it depends on who's doing the speaking. I mean, for some Russian artists who are taking stands against this invasion, against this war, against the Putin government, I think it does mean something for them to step outside in a regime that is very autocratic, that's very controlling, where you can actually find yourself in some danger for speaking out. It really does mean something, especially for people who are living in Russia. It's less of a threat to life and livelihood for people who are mainly living and working outside of Russia. But yeah, for Russian artists, I mean, it is something to stand up and make your voice heard when you have some kind of a platform to do it, I think.
Yeah, I certainly won't gainsay that. I mean, my perspective is mostly from our, on state side, where left and right now we see orchestras performing the Ukrainian national anthem before their performance, and it's like, all right. Like, that's sort of my reaction to this, as heartwarming and solidarity and all this stuff. I I admit to quite a bit of cynicism, like reading some of the gestures that we make in support of our allies.
I think the statements are important, but I don't think that people need to be applauding them so much as I think maybe I'm seeing right now on social media of like, oh, wow, like the Ukrainian national anthem, like, wow, this is so great that they're doing that. I mean, I think it's important for like big organizations, big institutions to like actually show the support. You know, I was there in Carnegie Hall on Sunday where the Vienna Philharmonic made an announcement at the top of the second half of the concert, which included Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, asking for a minute of silence after the piece in support of Ukraine. And that was like a carefully crafted statement that went across the desks of Carnegie Hall and the Vienna Philharmonic and all of this stuff. And, you know, it came out to like this one sentence, but it became this thing where they really had to curate that message and see what was going to be said. I think it's important to do it. Is it the most important thing that we should be focused on right now? No.
Yeah, and more to the point, I think, is it the only thing we can do? And to that, I also would say the answer is no. But in some cases, I feel like that is being taken as this is my gesture of support. The same thing, the same way as a post on social media is, right? But anyway, let's get into some of the more specifics here. I mean, the giant in the room, of course, is Gergiev, right? Who has now, there have been so many news articles about this. He's been fired as chief conductor in Munich. He has been canceled at Carnegie. They've canceled a pair of Mariinsky Orchestra appearances that were to be led at the beginning of May. His management, Felsner Artists, has resigned in supporting him. So, am I missing anything major, Will?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was asked to resign and submitted his resignation to the Edinburgh International Festival and to the Verbier Festival. I mean, that's a big one.
Yeah, Verbier.
But I mean, I think the biggest one is that the mayor of the city of Munich signaled at the end of last week that he would ask Gergiev to resign or he would fire him if he did not make a statement distancing himself and condemning the invasion of Ukraine. And he gave him something like 3 days with an ultimatum attached, and he was good to his word. You know, I mean, we're recording this on Tuesday, March 1st, and I think it was at the end of the business day yesterday. You know, he had said that Gergiev had until Monday, and as of today, Gergiev is no longer the conductor of the Munich Philharmonic. And that's a pretty big deal. And
all of this has happened, as far as we know, without any public statement from Gergiev.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen anything.
It's not as if he's even come out like strongly yes or strongly no, but no. We can just assume based on the premises of his career, right, that he is dependent on, he always has been dependent on Putin to a degree for quite a bit of his, you know, international success and his domestic success in Russia. But we haven't heard from him.
Right. And I mean, maybe it's worth delving into the background just briefly here, which is that Gergiev became the music director of what was then called the Kirov Theater, now called the Mariinsky, in the late 1980s, so right around the downfall of the Soviet Union. And this is when Putin was the mayor or even the sub-mayor or something of St. Petersburg. And because of that, they had a lot of, you know, personal interaction. I mean, they were kind of government functionaries at a similar level. And as Putin rose through the ranks, Gergiev rose through the ranks. And because he had the support of Putin at the top of the Kremlin infrastructure, a lot of money and opportunity went to support the Mariinsky Theater. And Gergiev was able to build it into the major edifice, I mean, both literal and figurative that it is today, in terms of, you know, adding buildings to the complex and shoring up the ballet corps and the opera company and the orchestra. And so, you know, now it's probably the largest cultural institution, at least on the classical music level, in all of Russia. So, you know, I mean, it's like I would never excuse Gergiev for not saying something against Putin, but like you can understand it, you know? I mean, it's like this guy made him. Yeah. And there's more there, which is, yeah, I mean, let's not forget that this is not the first Russian invasion of a sovereign foreign country, not even of this particular sovereign foreign country of Ukraine. And, you know, when Russia invaded Georgia in, I think, what was it, 2008, Gergiev, at Putin's behest, went and conducted a concert in South Ossetia, like to support the effort.
Well, at least, you know, I'm not at all like applauding Gergiev for this, but in contrast to this, Anna Netrebko, who is the other kind of big time artist that's been very closely associated with Putin, has been putting up and removing various posts on her Instagram and it seems to be a little bit of a mixed message from her in terms of where she stands. And this is where I feel very much this kind of conflict that I think Russian artists may be feeling about potential risk to their families for speaking out against Putin. Or maybe she just doesn't give a crap and just is doing whatever it is to kind of save her career. I can't make that assumption. But she's been kind of going back and forth about, she came out and said, I'm against war, but would not go ahead and name Putin or talk about the fact that Ukraine, she feels bad for Ukraine or anything like this. And then deleted that and then put up a post today of Gergiev and Netrebko, like herself, like as if like she's aligning herself with Gergiev and whatever, and then canceled appearances with the Zurich Opera, where she said she's pulling out of all performances for now because she needs time to like reflect on all of this. So
yeah, she's a piece of work. She is a real piece of work.
Really. Yeah.
And then she also tweets, I am opposed to this senseless war of aggression, and I'm calling on Russia to end this war right now to save all of us. We need people. And it's just like, what are you doing? Like, it really is so transparently like you are trying to have all of your cakes and eat all of them too.
Right. So I see what you're saying, Kensho. Like, at least Gergiev stands by his his resolutions, as odious as they may be.
And I mean, what we see here with Anna is not that uncommon with people, which is to say, like, we're artists. We're not political. We don't make political statements. We don't, all we want is to make music. And that seems like such a, especially in the light of, I mean, we have our own kind of domestic filter through which, but like, in the light of the last several years with all sorts of political currents and then, events like Black Lives Matter, it just seems irresponsible, uncivic, odious is a good word, to try and claim that your career and your art form have nothing to do with, quote, politics, that dirty business of politics that doesn't affect you and it's none of your business. I mean, like, that stance is, at this point in this world and with how interconnected everything is, inexcusable.
Well, especially when you're literally a politician. I mean, somebody like Gergiev, he's a government employee of several different governments. And unfortunately for him, those two governments came in conflict with each other, the German government and the Russian government. And, I mean, his career is politics as much as it is art or music.
Gergiev isn't the one arguing this. Netrebko is.
Yeah, right, right.
To some degree, Gergiev's silence is acknowledging that he is part of the political machine. I think he knows this, just like Kensho said.
And Netrebko is as well, right? There are many, many photo ops of her with
Putin.
Politicians, or even just politicians that support these kind of things as well. So it's not like this is hidden at all.
No, but I think that she thinks that her involvement with politics extends to nice photo ops and pleasant events where you can all smile and pretend that the world is all okay. Like that's her impression of her own political investiture, and and I'm glad the world is proving her wrong, frankly.
Well, it's funny. I hadn't seen that statement where she really did kind of, renounce or distance herself from the invasion. And I wonder if that has anything to do with the fact that Peter Gelb, the director of the Met, said that he would be cutting ties with all Putin-associated artists. Yeah. And I mean, back to your very original point, Tiffany, about like, what do these statements matter? I mean, there is a question of like, what counts? I mean, it's a very subjective measure. If you're somebody like Peter Gelb, saying like, oh, well, I won't hire anybody who's associated with Putin unless they renounce and denounce and separate themselves from him. Like, artists like to do these very, their managements, and if they're like tied with the regime, they're going to do these very carefully worded statements. And one really wonders, like, where's the cutoff? What's good enough?
Well, my original response, listeners, I'll share with you, when Kensho shared with us Netrebko's statement about, non-political artists and this kind of thing, my reaction was, wow, you really think that the bar is so low, like all we have to do is come out and make public statements in alignment with something until somebody like Netrebko comes out and remind us that the bar is even lower. Like, in fact, this bar of asking people to come out in opposition to war and to invasion and aggression and all the things that we teach our kids that we've been fighting against for most of human history. Apparently that is too much for people like Trepko. It's too political, you know?
It's just, you can't have it both ways. I mean, like, okay, if she were totally apolitical and she, like, you know, didn't accept any glamour press events from the Russian government and she never uttered a peep about anything to do with this, but, like, that's not her. That's not what she's doing.
Well,
it's like you say, Tiffany, she's political until it's bad for her.
Yeah.
And then she's like, I'm apolitical.
Well, and frankly, like it takes a disaster of this magnitude to the point where I don't even think it would be enough for her right now to remain silent. I mean, this is not a moment right now in which, you know, she, even if she hadn't taken all those photo ops with Putin, could have remained silent. I don't think with a high profile she had. I mean, there's a certain threshold that we've reached and in fact vaulted over. But let's get to some of the, I mean, I have been kind of re-inspired by that, you know, these kinds of statements actually do matter. So let's come to this side of the Atlantic and look at some of the statements and devotionals, I guess, that have been made. We have Vladimir Jurowski swapping out Tchaikovsky's March Slav in his Berlin concerts with the Great Gate of Kiev, which is, of course, the last movement of Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition, which, of course, there's been, you know, quite a bit of clarification on now by this point as, you know, whether that is, in fact, glorifying Russia, you know, tends to get posted as, like, Russian nationalist piece, and now, of course, it's called the Great Gate of Kiev, so we're going to play that. But anyway, that's one data point. We have Semyon Bychkov, who actually posted a really touching statement, I think, across all of his social media platforms in support and about how silence is not an option in this case. And of course, he's leading anthems of Ukraine, as lots of orchestras are now. And then Muti's statement, which I think popped up several times on my social media prior to his concert with CSO. I mean, it's like you say, Kensho, it was like extremely pithy and crafted statement, but also one of the earlier ones to come out, and so did make ripples in my social media. Thoughts or data points that I'm missing? Oh, there's one that I wanted to contribute, which is that on one of the listservs that I am part of, there was a discussion of Tchaikovsky's Little Russian Symphony, which of course Little Russia refers to Ukraine, and it was a talk about whether it was okay in this case to rename it the Ukrainian Symphony instead of the Little Russian Symphony, to which there was resounding support based on the fact that Tchaikovsky did not in fact give that nickname to the piece itself, and because we all still want to perform it, which is a whole other thing. But you know, there's that data point as well.
I wanted to bring something to the table that is kind of related on the other side of things. So, of course, the conductor Oksana Linev, who's a Ukrainian conductor who's going to be the first woman, or did she already conduct it Bayreuth, or is she scheduled to conduct it Bayreuth?
I don't know.
But she was the first woman to conduct at Bayreuth, obviously a very successful conductor. I mean, she's been putting out a lot of statements, of course, about Ukraine, and she actually did make a call out to Ukrainian composers now if they would be willing to write a piece in the style of Barbara Adagio for a concert that she's doing in Bologna, I think, in April. And so there is this kind of artistic, not only a statement, but also some kind of action that some people are doing. That's in great contrast to all of the non-statement statements that we've been reading so far.
Yeah, and actually just back to this idea of, you know, what else can we do? I mean, people like us, we can't really do that much. But I would point to this one very young Belarusian conductor who lives in Berlin. His name is Vitaly Alexeyenok. And I saw on Instagram that he has organized transports to and from the Ukrainian border through Poland, and has crowdsourced a bunch of food and kids' items and stuff like that, and is literally driving people across Europe to get them out of the war zone into the safety of Germany. So there's somebody who's really doing something material to help people on the ground.
Okay, well, we keep our eyes on the situation as ever, and, you know, everyone do what you can. All right, let's go to our second topic of the day, and hopefully something a little bit lighter. Will.
Our next segment is a response, alas, to an item from Norman Lebrecht's blog, Slipped Disc, a site that we have discussed before, essentially the sewer pipe of the classical music information ecosystem. In a post titled, Not Enough Women? Let's Include Over 40s, Lebrecht writes, the Paris-based La MAESTRA competition, a women's-only conducting contest, was always a discriminatory proposition. I will note that discriminatory is misspelled. Its first attempt in September 2022 yielded... That can't be, because that
all of this is wrong.
Yielded a broad range of international talent, mostly veterans of other contests. This time, for a contest starting March 3, the contest has selected 14 candidates from 202 applicants. And then he goes on to list them. 2 of the contestants are 45 years old and 1 is 42. This is not a level playing field. A musician of 45 competing against another half her age has an unfair advantage of experience and strategy. A young woman entering this lineup must think, what am I dung? What am I dung here among these tried and tested opponents? Oh boy.
I love that on this podcast we try to like make people sound good, and that is like Norman is like
Norman
the sole
Lebrecht.
exception.
It's impossible. It's literally
Sole
impossible.
exception.
It's literally, I mean, all you have to do is read what he wrote. He's donged this to himself. So anyway, as often happens on his blog, Lebrecht has raised an interesting discussion point that happens to be coated in thick layers of misogyny, ageism, elitism, and his never-ending need to gain attention and acolytes from the worst sorts of people. So the question remains, do age limits make sense in the world of classical music competitions, particularly in conducting, a discipline that people often come to later in their lives? Does age necessarily give a competitor a leg up? Tiffany, you flagged this for us. I think that you have some thoughts. What do you feel about this?
You kind of have to unpack what he's saying, because reading the title of this post, I thought at first, like, surely he must be saying something about we shouldn't have the over 45s and that we, or that we should not have the younger ones. Like, it's one or the other. And so I came away from reading this post kind of unclear as to which one he was saying. But my reaction to this on the face of it is that it does not necessarily make sense to say that the over 45s have an unfair advantage above their younger competitors. In fact, if anything, as we've discussed on our podcast, our world has a stated preference towards glitzy, glammy, young-looking conductors to the point where, in our field, ageism is really a thing. And so, especially in the case of competitions, which are generally seen as the domain of young folk, I would say that the older competitors face a marked disadvantage in this case.
I'm the person that's very anti-competition, so I mean this is obviously colored in that aspect, but I mean what is the point of this competition? For me, when I read this or when I see what they're trying to do with this is to just give awareness, exposure, whatever you want to call it, to women conductors, right? I mean, does it really matter who wins in this regard in terms of just what the competition is trying to do? Or is it just about including as many people as possible? So for this, like obviously the age limit is silly to enforce. For something like the menuing competition where they have like age divisions, obviously those are natural to how the competition is structured, I guess. So of course we should put limits on that. But I mean, for conducting, like you said, Will, I mean, people come into it at different points in their lives or whatever. Natalie Stutzmann comes to mind, who had a full career singing and then wanted to conduct, and someone to say, well, you're too old to start conducting now is kind of the, like what is the point of that?
Well, I mean, so what is the point of this? Yeah, and does it matter who wins? In a way, yes, because whoever wins, it's going to really matter a lot maybe to their career. I mean, this has become, in short order, a rather prominent and important competition, and these competitions can be big stepping stones to a career. As we know, it's really hard to make a career in conducting, so everything counts. And yeah, I like the fact that there's no age limit on this, especially in a competition that's geared towards women conductors, who it's only been very recently have gotten any kind of support or openings in the broader world of this career path. So I think it behooves the industry to allow older people these kinds of stepping stones at this stage in their life, because, there's so many roadblocks on their path heretofore.
Is there any world in which a minimum age makes sense for a competition that is very high profile? And in a hypothetical world, how high could that minimum age be? I mean, we know competitions of minimum 18 years. Okay, fine. I'm not talking about that. But is there a world in which we try and acknowledge partly, by this age minimum, where we try and acknowledge that people of a certain generation, at this point, those who are between, let's say, 35 and 50, could have been really prominent conductors, but faced so many roadblocks because of where they fell in history, where this might make sense. I'm just throwing that out there as a thought experiment.
I don't see why not, just because there's so many competitions out there. And so many of them are age capped at the maximum level. So why not do something different, and help support mid-career artists? I mean, that's like where the slog is, right? Oftentimes people get big opportunities early on, and then like you become, if you make it through the long middle, then the reverse ageism sets in, right? And like, especially for these white-haired old men, who are like conductors and everybody worships them. But, it's the long middle of your career where it can be hard to break out at any point.
We've talked about ageism. Would it be reasonable to try and fight that with a minimum age limit?
I don't know, because I think that, like you said, there's an industry-wide, it's not I don't want to say a problem, but a skew toward younger talent anyway. So it's not like making one competition have a minimum age prevent this obsession with like finding the younger talents.
No,
right?
I'm not saying it's going to change the field, but would it raise La Maestra, in our estimation? I actually think it might raise mine. I mean, frankly, it's just like, because otherwise my immediate reaction, and perhaps yours as well, Kensho, being so anti-competition, is to competitions is like, that's for young, hot whippersnapper with good PR, a management, and a certain drive on social media to make a splashy splash and do a world tour and pat themselves on the back. Like that's what I think of competitions.
Couldn't have said it better.
But if there was, like, let's say, minimum 35 years of age, like, would that raise my faith in terms of like, could this competition produce somebody that I actually care about? I don't know, just a thought experiment.
Yeah, I'll just end this with a few points about this post itself. And I hate getting sucked into this. But just the fact that the title of the post was "Not Enough Women?" Blah, 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 blah. And then in the third sentence, he says that there were 202 applicants and there were 14, nominees selected. It's like, well, no. Clearly, if they had wanted to choose everybody who was under 25, I'm sure that they could have done that quite handily. And then, he says a women's only conducting contest was always a discriminatory proposition.
Well, excuse me.
Well, okay, maybe it is a discriminatory proposition. But you know what? For the past 200 years, the whole conducting profession has been a discriminatory proposition on the level of gender, race, age, whatever you want to say. And, you don't just like snap your fingers and automatically everything is equal across the board. So, if this is really like the hill you want to die on, that like one competition for conductors can't be devoted to women, I don't know. We got to stop reading this guy's blog. This is not doing us any favors here. All right, listeners, we would be very interested in knowing what you think about this. And so get at us, classicalgabfest@gmail.com. With that, on to our third and final topic, Kensho.
In the 21st century, the manner in which film music is composed has shifted dramatically away from those of the Golden Age composers, such as Bernard Herrmann, Max Steiner, Eric Korngold, or even John Williams. These composers would either write every note of the score or have significant influence over decisions made by their orchestrators. Today, with increased demand for film and TV projects across many streaming platforms, marquee composers of the day, like Hans Zimmer, will take on 6 to 7 projects at once, employing a group of composers known as ghost composers to write the music. These composers get paid as little as $150 per music cue, with no benefits and no guarantee for a credit or possibility of royalties. In a piece for Vanity Fair, which we will link in the show notes, Mark Razzo details how the current system takes advantage of composers and how some of them are attempting to right the ship. This is a long article, very detailed. There's a lot to unpack in here, but what did you guys know about this whole Hans Zimmer complex of little, what do they call them? Zinglings? Zinglings? And how this industry works?
Yeah, I did, because I have at various points in my life and career made inquiries about what it would mean to pursue a life as a film composer or orchestrator or arranger. And this is exactly what I learned. I mean, I guess it's not commonly known. I mean, everybody in the film music world knows that when you see somebody's name listed as the composer of a film score, that name is really a brand name that might as well be at the... It's like the name of a corporation, essentially. A musical corporation.
Music by Walmart is basically what it is.
It's maybe a little denigrating, but yeah, it essentially...
Well, like certainly on the level of like music by Macy's or something, right?
Well, okay, whatever. But these guys are basically CEOs of corporate structures that are producing commercial music. And, they farm out the project to their various underlings. One really interesting thing that I learned when I was sort of exploring and interviewing people about their experiences in this world is that, so you would think that like what's really hard is to become Hans Zimmer, right? Or Danny Elfman or one of these people. But what these people told me is that like they have to hustle to get these $150 a cue kind of gigs, where what they might mainly be doing is taking a composer's MIDI, mocking it up into notation, adding articulations, doing this and that and the other, making it look pretty so that a real musician could read it. And for that, they have to like struggle and politic and knock down doors to like get able to do that. And at that point, when I learned that, I was like, okay, thanks very much. I think I'll content myself with something else.
Yeah, because that seems to take away the fundamental, if you ever felt like you wanted to be part of a big corporate machine, like the whole point would be job security. And this takes that away.
Exactly.
So why? Why would you ever want to?
Something that I did learn from this article, which I didn't know, is that there's no composers union. Apparently there was one until 1971 when they went on strike, and then they busted it and it never came back. It seems like there's enough people working in this industry that they could unionize. Somebody could get in there and make that happen.
Do you think the fear of doing that is perhaps what's already happening in terms of outsourcing the recording of those things that we've talked about, right? Bringing back, what was it, the Budapest?
Yeah, the Budapest recording orchestra right? Or something like that.
And so wouldn't the response perhaps be to just create more ZINGLINGS across the sea?
Yeah, across Eastern Europe. That's a really good point, Kensho. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing that these people do that's so special or, American or whatever, Hollywood-based, that it can't be outsourced to some other country. That's a very good point.
Yeah, and I guess the carrot dangling at the end of the stick is kind of people like John Powell who came from these studios and got their break by getting some credit and it's found so interesting the famous like Hans Zimmer like effect is the score for Inception, and it just turns out that he didn't there's a rumor that he didn't even write that cue. It's somebody else.
That was
and these
amazing.
Stories of I love the stories, like little anecdotes about the director in a recording session, like just like lavishing praise over a certain cue that this big name composer had supposedly written, but he hadn't. But then the person that actually wrote the cue is also in the room, but can't speak up and take credit for this. I mean, just how horrible of an artistic environment is that, where you're not getting credit for the work that you do.
Right. And in a situation where like that, the composer could easily say like, oh, actually that was Chuck over here. He did a great job. I agree with you. So nice to hear. But yeah, I mean, like, I definitely learned some other things here too, which is that like apparently the royalty split for these cues is 50% for the, top name composer, and then 50% for the person who actually writes it. But if the top name composer even says, oh, I think we need a few more staccatos on those eighth notes, then immediately their share goes up to 75%, and the actual composer share goes down to 25%. And if they even they can pad that as much as they want to, essentially, because it's ungoverned.
Well, and then to just read it further to that is that then if the studio comes back or the director comes back and says we need to change something, then all the royalties go actually to I'm just going to say Hans Zimmer, because he is basically the placeholder for any of these kind of like big name composers. So Hans Zimmer is taking all the money basically right now. And speaking of that, right, this whole idea also comes from the streaming platforms removing royalties from agreements with composers as well, including people like Hans Zimmer, where basically you're offered a buyout of your royalties. So you get one lump sum and you forego any of the royalties. So those things are now, it's not just the composers that are the bad guys, but also like these streaming platforms like Netflix are also imposing some of these things that make it way more difficult to make any money at all.
That's right. I mean, there are a lot of composers in the 70s and 80s and 90s who got very rich off of, having written the theme song for like a big famous TV show that, and nobody necessarily would have even known that it would have become a big hit. But it did. And pennies on a dollar add up after a lot of reruns and syndication deals and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I mean, I think the big takeaway for like our audience is classical music people, we hold this film score world in a certain fascination, and people love their Bernard Herrmann and their Korngold and stuff like that. But like the modern world of film score is very, very different. It's only occasionally that actual musicians play music anymore that go into commercial properties. And I'm not just talking about orchestras, I'm talking about like any musicians. It's mostly done on MIDI now, synths, drum machines, stuff like that. So, there's still a few people who are doing it. My beloved Alberto Iglesias in Spain and Philippe Rombi in France, and our beloved John Williams here in the States are still writing actual music for actual people to play. But it ain't the same thing that it was.
And there's less, again, and I'll just close with there's uproar about recently the Academy Awards also decided to relegate the Best Music Score award to like the off-air segment, just like the Grammys did with the whole classical music sphere of things, where there is just not at all any appreciation or importance placed on the role of music in films in general. And we're not even talking about classical music, just any kind of film score being basically relegated to second-tier status in terms of the artistic process of making a film. So all this is very sad to read about and learn. All right. Well, this wraps up a kind of a depressing episode of the Classical Gabfest, but hopefully our mixtape maybe can cheer people up. Moving on.
I think that's not going to. I think it's definitely not going to.
In our classical mixtape, we each recommend some music that's caught our ear this week to share with our listeners. So, Will, what do you have this week?
Well, my ears are totally devoted to Johann Sebastian Bach's St. Matthew Passion this week because I have a performance of said work coming up on March 13th, Sunday afternoon. It happens to be streaming available, so get tickets even if you don't live in the Seattle area, listeners. But, this is a monster of a piece. 2 orchestras, 2 choruses, 4 soloists, well, 6 soloists, really. Kids choir, all sorts of weird instruments like viola da gamba and oboes d'amore and recorders and stuff. I mean, it is a real logistical lift to put together. Continuo, keyboards, theorbo, the whole thing. So, my life is basically devoted to this right now. And I wanted to choose what is probably my favorite aria. I mean, it's impossible to pick your favorite aria from this piece, which is just like full of the most amazing arias ever written. But the one that I have chosen is, I think, a good piece for this particular week where a lot of us are feeling sort of pensive, morose slightly. This is the soprano aria Aus Liebe, and it's performed by the Netherlands Bach Society. What I love about this piece is that there's no continuo, there's no orchestra, basically. I mean, the orchestration is tiny. It's just a solo flute, 2 oboes da caccia, which are now played on English horn, and the soprano. And the 2 oboes are just like playing these sort of ostinato quarter notes the whole time. I mean, the action is really just in the duet between the flute and the soprano. It's an amazing piece of music.
Okay, Kensho, you're up.
All right. Well, I was searching for Ukrainian composers and things pertaining to the horrible situation at hand, and Will suggested a work by Valentin Silvestrov, one of the composers that I was kind of looking up on, and he is a Ukrainian composer, still alive, born in I think 1935. I want to say 1937. He was born in 1937. And this piece is entitled appropriately Requiem for Ukraine, but this was written in 2014 during the Maidan protests in Ukraine during that time, which is very much linked to what's happening today. And so this performance of this piece is by the Kiev Chamber Choir with Mykola Hobdish as conductor.
It's a beautiful piece. And just to give credit where credit is due, I don't want to be a Hans Zimmer here. This link was sent to me by listener Jeff as a suggestion. So, I didn't drum this up, but I was happy to share it with you guys.
Thanks, Kensho and Will, and mostly listener Jeff. I am putting in our mixtape the Lacrymosa from Britten's War Requiem. I find that Britten captures a particular sense of, I don't know, it's not despair to the point of being saccharine, but it's despair in like kind of a crunchy sense of like there's just things that you cannot solve. And I think he captures that feeling really well, and in particular in this piece. So this is Rostropovich conducting. Actually, check out the video, if you will, listeners. It's actually worth watching. It's an older video recording of a performance conducted by Rostropovich. The soprano here is Makvala Kasrashvili. Tenor is Anthony Rolfe Johnson. You'll find the links to all these and to the rest of our classical mixtape in the show notes.
And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Classical Gabfest. I'm William White, and on behalf of Tiffany Liu and Kensho Watanabe, I'd like to thank you so much for listening and to encourage you to subscribe and rate us on your podcast app. We'd also love your help spreading the word about the show on social media, where you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can reach us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy listening, and we'll be with you next week.